the future. But still, we can see where trends are going. So what I've been observing in the at the turn of the 21st century, I was at the beginning of the 21st century, I was in Germany, in Berlin, and then a lot in France, because my girlfriend and my wife is from France, south of France. I was also traveling a lot to England, and I saw a lot of anti-Semitism on the streets, and in many places, in conversations as well. And that was often related to the first Intifada. And then already was an increase in anti-Semitic incidents. Jews were being attacked on the streets, in synagogues and in schools. And you probably remember the wave really then of Islamist terrorism that was most severe in France, but also in Belgium, in Spain, and Britain, across Western Europe, really, targeting Jews mostly, but not only Jews, also the civilian population at large. And then somewhat later, like 15 years later, neo-Nazi terror really became more and more visible, specifically in this country here in the US, after Charlottesville in 2017. Charlottesville already we saw maybe the force of the neo-Nazi type of anti-Semitism coming back with the slogans, Jews will not replace us, and these kind of conspiracy theories that the far right would make Jews responsible for what they saw as a decline of the West by immigrants coming into the country, these kind of ideas. And then we saw really terror with Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and that was, I don't know how that was for your community, but here in Bloomington, that was the first time. So Bloomington has a very tiny Jewish community, very nice community. It's a small, well, not so small synagogue, a synagogue that had always an open door policy. And that was the first time that they shut the doors, that they had to look who's coming in, at what time, put cameras on and shut the door and so on. And that was across the country that Jewish communities started after Pittsburgh to be concerned about security. And then, of course, we had other incidents, Poway and internationally, even like the neo-Nazi terrorists not only target Jewish communities, but mostly, but we saw Christchurch in Australia, but then in Germany, in Halle, you might remember that was a traumatic terror attack there. And we've seen if we look at incidents, so that in some countries, not all countries have good statistics, but some countries have a handful. Britain, France, now increasingly a little bit Germany and United States, they have like agencies that collect anti-Semitic incidents. United States, we have the hate crime reports by the FBI, and we also have the ADL collecting anti-Semitic incidents. And we see more or less rise in different countries globally of anti-Semitism in waves often in the last 20 years, 25 years, since really the turn of the 21st century, often related to violence in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So when there was 2009, 2014, 2021, and certainly now, there is really has been a peak of anti-Semitic incidents, but not only then, also what is perhaps not so much known is even after very violent incidents like the shooting in Toulouse of 3 children and 1 teacher at the Jewish school in 2012, we saw after that a lot more anti-Semitic incidents, and not only in France but also in Britain. So people anti-Semites seem to feel emboldened by anti-Semitic action. And we have so that is from the extremes. We have seen these things that take them out action, but we've seen it also in the demonization of Israel that has increased, and also Holocaust distortions, and not only on the fringes of society, but also in the mainstream. And for us, we are monitoring social media here. We have a research lab with students, grad students, undergrad students, and we monitor different social media platforms. And during COVID, we saw really a dramatic rise of this strange comparisons to the Holocaust, right? You might have seen people who didn't feel comfortable with the lockdown saying, we're persecuted as the Jews, these kind of things. So distortions of the Holocaust, more mainstream, became more acceptable to use this kind of comparisons. In surveys, it's not so clear. So the surveys over the last 25 years, we see sometimes a little bit of rise in some countries, then not so much. It's unclear, but in the United States, for the first time a year ago, the ADL recorded a really doubling even the anti-Semitic attitudes. That was a bit strange. So that was in fall 22, 20% of Americans believe 6 or more tropes out of 11, sorry. So that is significantly more than the 11% from 2019. And before that, it has been around 10% always, but now a year ago was 20%. And also a lot of people believe at least in one of these 11 anti-Semitic statements. They have 85% believed in at least one of these anti-Semitic statements. And that's also an increase from 3 years earlier. At that time, it was 60%, 61%. But what we've seen consistently in the last 25 years in surveys, not all surveys include this, but when they include some minorities, anti-Semitic attitudes are higher among certain minorities, not all minorities, but among Muslim minorities, it's consistently, not many people want to hear this, but this is what the surveys tell us. And I looked at 30 different surveys from different countries. It's consistently that the level of anti-Semitic attitudes is higher among Muslims than among non-Muslims. It doesn't mean, of course, that all Muslims are anti-Semitic, but the likelihood is higher. And it's also true for Black people and to some extent for Hispanic people. Why that is, of course, nobody's born with anti-Semitic attitudes. We can talk about this. But this is at least what the surveys tell us. And some minorities, maybe it's also for them easier to express it. Maybe there's less reluctance and self-censorship among them, whatever the reasons are, but this is what the surveys have shown. But all of that has changed dramatically, I would say, with the Hamas massacre of October 7th. So, of course, sponsored by and trained by Iran. That is sometimes forgotten, but this put it really on another level. First of all, for Israel, of course, this is still has traumatic impact in the Israeli society, with the really unspeakable violence, including this what comes more and more out, this horrific sexual violence. I think unseen ever before. I mean, this kind of the Hamas terrorists, they filmed all of that joyfully and were proud of that and disseminated it. So this is has had, of course, a very traumatic effect on Israelis, but on Jews around the world, because the Hamas is not shy about this. They are at war against the Jews, and they say so repeatedly. And they put this war against the Jews back on the agenda. And this is another reason why it's very difficult for me to understand the reactions or non-reactions, mostly, to this pogrom. Because, of course, we had also people who found strong words. I was happy that the president of this country found strong words to condemn the pogrom, and also other world leaders, some of the world leaders. But many did not. In many organizations, in many, even like on a social level, people would not find words to condemn this. Of course, it's difficult to find even words to describe it, what happened. So some people have been reminded of the Einsatzgruppen, or it's really, certainly of pogroms, but it's really difficult to find words now to describe what happened there. But this lack of condemnation, or sometimes finding excuses or trying to contextualize it, is difficult on many levels. I mean, first of all, of course, it's deeply disappointing that there's not more solidarity with the Israeli victims. But then it's also, whatever you think politically of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, if you cannot condemn this kind of violence, this kind of action, what kind of vision is that for the world people have? I think it's really deeply troubling that people cannot condemn these acts. It's really deeply troubling. Whatever you think of, even whatever you think of anti-Semitism, even for anti-Semites, this should not be acceptable, I would say. But yeah, so people do find excuses, and what we found in the reactions is, and it's most obvious on American campuses, that I'm sure you have seen some reports of that, that we found even people who were endorsing the actions of Hamas and celebrating this as resistance. Even on the day, on the October 7th, we had students' organizations blaming literally what they said, everything is Israel's fault, everything is to blame on Israel. And that was partly condemned, but we had this on many campuses. We had this, the first ones I think were at Harvard, right? The elites of the elites. They were the fastest in doing that. So, but then the other university or groups at other universities followed. And we also saw that not only from students, but also from professors. Some of you might have seen, I think that was the most watched congressional hearing, what the three presidents of Harvard, UPenn, and MIT had to say, or could not say clearly, that they condemned calls for genocide. And this is this was, I think, another sign how widespread this kind of thinking is, that makes it apparently for people difficult to condemn Hamas and show sympathy and empathy with Israeli and Jewish victims. So in many universities, the students, staff and faculty, Jewish students, staff and faculty, they were, and parents, they were dismayed by the lack of responses. And in many universities, including my university, the administration, they put out statements only, and often weak statements, and only after a lot of pressure from parents, from donors, from alumni, from politicians. And then often it was phrased in a way that condemns then both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, and or make some other kind of contextualization, which is then, yeah, it's not as forcefully as many would have wished. Then we saw slogans, and this call for genocide. What we heard then in this hearing was this slogan, "Free Palestine from the river to the sea." That in this context, I mean, this is a Hamas slogan that the Hamas has been using. So if you just adopt this slogan, that is a call for genocide. So this, even in our university, was painted on the pavement, and was there for several days, and Jewish students had to walk by for this, and there was not even a condemnation from the administration, right? So, and this is our university is one of those universities that's relatively calm, where we don't have BDS groups and not a lot of instigators who are pro-Palestinian. We have a small pro-Palestinian group now that does this graffiti, but it's relatively small. So in other universities, it's even worse. So how come that this is the case? I mean, one, of course, we can say there are some individual actors, and as often there are only those who are really vocal about it and take action and tear down these posters of the kidnapped people. These are very few, of course, but they're very loud. But they're also tolerated. So the lack of condemnation, that's really what bothers me. Because if that would be a forceful condemnation, then they would be put to the sidelines and would probably not do this anymore. But there is this lack of condemnation. So how come that we are in a situation like this? And I think there are two main factors that have been established over the past 20 years or so, and that we can see in many circles. So if we talk about universities, it's often even more so at elite universities, but not only there. So one is that we have it in, at least in some of these departments and well beyond this in social circles, a way of thinking that is very much informed by post-colonial thinking, which was a niche ideology 20 years ago, and has a lot of influence from the Soviet propaganda, anti-Zionist Soviet propaganda from 1967 to 1988, and interestingly, almost the exact same words and slogans from that propaganda effort, the anti-Zionist propaganda efforts, we hear today on the streets. But back then in the West, it was only small fringe groups who were using that. But now it has come into the mainstream. So that is this post-colonial thinking, going back to works from Edward Said and others who are still adored in many of these studies that are Middle Eastern studies, but well beyond Middle Eastern studies. And that has, on top of that, there is this idea that that goes back to critical race theory and some adaptation of that, where people put the world in a very binary view. They see oppressors and oppressed, and see power, allegedly power dynamics everywhere, and see themselves as victims. Even at elite universities, the students see themselves as the oppressed. But they see, the entire relationships in the world as oppressor and oppressed, and oppressed peoples and oppressor peoples. And then often it's added onto that is what you could call a racist view, even saying, well, all the whites are oppressors and all the brown and black are oppressed. And in some contexts, that works, of course. I mean, the United States has a long history of anti-black racism. And in that sense, you can talk about white privilege, but there are lots of problems with that. Of course, if you try to apply this to everything, and then what you do with the Jews. So many have this idea that the Jews are white and oppressors, and they are influential anyway, and they govern the world anyway. So this kind of thinking is very easy applicable to that. And this is one of the reasons why in this diversity, equity, inclusion trainings, and I'm in my department, I'm chair of the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Commission. And we had just 2 weeks ago, we had a meeting of all the chairs in all the departments of the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Commission. And there was not a word about the anti-Semitism that the Jewish students are facing. And I said, why do we need these meetings if now where we have about 4,500 students, or 4,500 Jewish students, and many of them are worried. They came to me personally, they're worried about the rise of anti-Semitism, some have experienced anti-Semitism. And so these diversity, equity, inclusion commissions, it's not on their radar. It's just Jews do not figure in there. We try to remind them, we do them some workshops, but this is just the practice of it. So this is one of the reasons that this is so widespread, that people have this binary worldview, which is so strong that even a pogrom like this, with the horrific videos and pictures and testimonies that we have, that everybody has seen or heard of, that even with that, it does not break through that this worldview doesn't work in this, and at least not in this case. But people try to put it immediately into this binary worldview. That's one explanation. That's one pattern that I see over and over again. And the other one is that since a good 20 years, there has been a lot of money put in, and often money from countries like Qatar and previously Saudi Arabia, in Middle Eastern studies programs, and also in support of some student groups that are radical, like BDS Students Group or Palestine Solidarity Committees, that have now an organization level that is surprising. So we see that they have a national organization. We see the same flyers everywhere. We see the same slogans everywhere. They organize very quickly. And this is not only spontaneous outrage about the sufferings of people in Gaza. A lot of this was organized even before the response by the IDF, right? So this is really an organized form, and it was also often in response of the call for Hamas, for example, of the Day of Resistance. They called for one day of resistance, right? Where a lot of, in Europe, even more than in the US, Jewish schools were completely empty. I was on a call this morning where there was, from Germany, they said the Jewish schools in Germany on that Friday, not a single parent wanted to bring the kids to the schools because they were afraid that the call from Hamas, from the Hamas leader, there was a response. And there was luckily not as violent response as people thought, but there were protests. So all that to say, some of the funding that has gotten into organizations at universities, but also Islamist organizations. So this is more a problem in Europe, but also a problem here in the United States. So CARE, the Council of American Islamic Relations, their leader was just a week ago was put on record praising Hamas as resistance. And so these Islamist groups, they had a long-term relationship with the government as well as saying they're representative of Muslims. They're not representative of Muslims. They pretend to be representative of Muslims. They're big organizations and they have funding, often coming from abroad. They play also a very negative role. And then sadly, we have a few activists, anti-Zionist activists organized in organizations like Jewish Voice for Peace, and they are misused heavily by anti-Zionists. And I was on a radio show. I didn't, just until an hour before the radio show started, I didn't know exactly who was coming, but there were 3 people invited. A professor who was from this organization, Jewish Voice for Peace. So he was then invited as representative of the Jewish community, but he was from Jewish Voice for Peace. So he's not really speaking for the Jewish community, maybe 1%, if at all. And then a student from Students for Justice in Palestine. And I was invited as an academic on anti-Semitism. But yeah, so that was then presented as this is the Jewish voice. And this is, of course, misused. So the organizer of this show, I think, misused this. I mean, either he was completely stupid or he just missed it, because this is, he could say, well, this is a Jewish voice, so he's very much against Israel. And there should be some legitimacy to it. And this person, of course, was using it. So there's a lot of misuse of these so-called Jewish voices. And all of this brings it together that now we're in a situation where it's very difficult to find allies to work with. A lot of people, I hear this more and more, said, well, we had some that can be on a personal level, but also on the organization level, people we could speak to, relate to, and now we feel very lonely. You might have watched Chuck Schumer's speech, who really, that was, I think, the essence of that, saying, well, now Jewish communities across the nation in the United States feel very lonely. This is new, I think. This is at least on that level. In European communities, that was there before. But I think, so coming to some potentially, well, things we could do. I think a lot of people who saw these very strange, really, things happening on campuses. I mean, people are outraged, I think, about also how the lack of response by the presidents of these universities that many saw that felt really inadequate. Even if this is used now in a very political and partisan way, I think still many Americans think this is not right, and something should be done about it. So I see potential for new allies, maybe not the old allies, but also for allies who think that, well, Jews are targeted and this is not right, but it goes well beyond this. I mean, when we see this these kind of responses in universities, or the lack of responses, this is and the lack of condemnation of Hamas. As I said earlier, this is of course devastating for Jewish communities, but again, what does it mean for a vision of the world if this cannot be condemned, right? So people, I think, some at least, deeply understand that this is wrong, and so perhaps we can find new allies and try to reform not only universities but also this kind of thinking. Yeah, I didn't speak much about the what we saw online, but just a few words about that. We recently did a study on the reactions after October 7th, and the link I saw was put in the announcement. And there we saw, so that was mostly platforms where a lot of people from the far right operate or discuss things. And so we saw that there was a lot of even endorsing of the Hamas actions from the far right. And there was what I would say a mobilization for action that was different from what we have seen before. Before, there was a lot of dissemination of anti-Semitic ideas, but now we saw more really a call for action, which is of course very worrisome. On different platforms, of course, but yeah. So of course there is a need really to do something about all of that. And again, I think we need to find allies to condemn that outright. And yeah, I don't know what you're hearing in your private or conversations at work or with friends, but I would be very much interested in hearing what the situation is in California. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Günther. Thank you very much, and take questions. Since there's a passel of us, maybe you can use the hand raising. There we go. Christine, no big surprise, has got the first question. Got to unmute. Don't forget to unmute.
I thoroughly applaud what you were saying, and my question is that the kind of pathetic left that exists in the United States is also really incredibly ignorant about the politics of the Middle East and its history. And when some of us who had led the opposition to apartheid in South Africa, we know it's not the same. We know how different it is. And we put pressure, I'm an anthropologist, on the American Anthropological Association to not do BDS, to really make a distinction. We lost a vote that was done without a quorum. And now, I mean, that was a couple of years ago, and now they're basically completely siding with the evasion of Hamas as a terrorist organization, and horrifyingly ignoring the issues of violence against women that are absolutely clear, both from the structure of Hamas in general and their atrocities. And so some of us, we tried to get the leadership of the AAA, we know these people, it's not that big an organization, to take a stand, and they just refused to do it. So a bunch of us, really, maybe 20 senior anthropologists, basically said, well, we're resigning from the organization because it does not stand for the kind of defense of human rights that we have tried to make it stand for in the last 50 years. And they're so confused, the politics are so confused that it ends up feeding this fascist agenda. And it makes me absolutely nuts. And then they turn around and say, or at least my email turned around and said, you betrayed the left. And I like, this is going to hurt my feelings, but this is so, oh no, anyway. So, but you get accused of being a rabid reactionary if you're standing for human rights. It's absolutely ghastly. And the right of a country, any country. I mean, look at what happened with Serbia and Croatia, horrible ethnic cleansing war, but nobody said, oh, these countries shouldn't exist. But when it comes to Israel, you shouldn't conduct the war this way, which I agree. But people are calling for its erasure, which is horrendous. So I'm really asking you, have you seen any kind of international response? I mean, not at the high levels, but at the level of organizers to these kinds of egregious comparisons and their implications that somehow, from the river to the sea is only a metaphor, it doesn't really mean genocide. And of course it does, right? But, how do you address as groups this kind of willful ignorance of the histories and why Palestinian peoples are suffering under Hamas, and the fact that if Hamas won, that women would continue to be sort of violence against women in the home, because that's what happens, and all the rest of this stuff, which we know exists, and that they're in complete denial about. So what do we do? I'm so frustrated. All I could do was resign from the AAA. Well, big deal. We'll be, but and there was a series of us, and we laid out why. Yeah. And it's like, well, we really wish you would remain a member. And really, it's enough to drive you out of your mind. But do you have any suggestions for organizing?
Yes, of course. It's very important to organize. You probably know Carrie Nelson when you. Yes. Yeah. So. There is one very nice group for academics that's called the Academic Engagement Network. So I highly recommend that. That is really trying to organize faculty who do not share this anti-Zionist nonsense and propaganda and often anti-Semitism, and want to do something about it. It's the Academic Engagement Network. And they do workshops, they do webinars, they try to organize and also try to connect people in universities who do not feel that way. Yeah. And of course, I mean, I'm one of the authors or signers of this. There was a letter at the New York Review of Books. So the New York Review of Books has a history of anti-Zionism. And there was a letter signed by historians, Holocaust historians, including Omar Bartov. Omar Bartov is a fine historian, but he has also a hatred of Israel. And he now apparently says anything to hurt Israel. So there is a group that has previously not been shy in doing all kinds of comparison to the Holocaust, and historians. And now they say, well, nobody should compare this pogrom to the Holocaust. So, but of course, as I mentioned, I mean, it reminded many people of the Einheitsgruppen. It reminded many people of this ideology that's really a war against the Jews. So, of course, if you do comparison correctly as an academic, well, you compare, but you find differences and you find some points of reference. Anyway, so we wrote this, and there's a little conversation there, and it's important to, even if then there is a response to that, and they won't change their mind, but at least there is something out there that objects to that. I think objection is very important, because this, again, this kind of, what happened on October 7th, nobody on his or her right mind can find an excuse for that, I would say, other than people who have such a ideology in their head. And so it's not a coincidence that the worst things we've seen comes from academia, because they put their theories first. And what they call theories is in fact ideology. They put this first, and they only want to see the world in this phrase. And whatever does not fit in there, they have to rip it off, literally. They have to rip off the posters of the kidnapped people, because this is bothering So it has to get out of the mind, and they have to deny what happened. They have to not look at the, just maybe even deny. There was one journalist, I think it's from the BBC, who saw, you might know this, that the Israeli government put together from these Hamas terrorists videos that they put on the, and they put together a film, and they show it to selective audiences. So this one journalist saw it and then came out of that and said, I didn't see any evidence for violence against women. I mean, what does he? So I mean, you
because
can.
Women always walk down the street with blood dripping from their aprons, right?
Right. So if you have this kind of minds, and it's also not new that the anti-Semitism is coming from universities.
Mm-hmm.
Those who burned the books in Germany, that was student-driven. The Nazis only jumped on it, but it was student-driven. Those who burned the books.
Mm-hmm. Well, there was one other aspect of it that I wanted to ask you about, and that is, what do you, I mean, many of us are writing in different formats and, social media and journals and so on. But one of the constant harping that either is said explicitly or at least intimated is that somehow, even if the atrocities existed, which I find ghastly, but even if they existed, that somehow Israel brought it on themselves. And I have heard this, and it drives me up a wall. He goes, yeah, sure, right? These progressive kibbutzim, on the border, who are doing joint programs with people in Gaza. Yeah, they brought this on themselves. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. And this is a constant harp.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, this is victim blaming. There's we see that in many ways, but very, I mean, to do with Israel, it's very often, absolutely, yes. But it's whatever. But what I also see, and I think this is a danger that I see sometimes in the Jewish diaspora, saying, well, this is now a right-wing government, and it's true, and I wouldn't vote for this government, but I'm not an Israeli, and what they vote for the government, and that's their problem. But it's whatever they do, it doesn't matter really for the anti-Semites. It doesn't matter if it's a right-wing or left-wing government. It's really, this is the matter. And if there are some issues, of course there are some issues in Israel. There's racism in Israel. Some of the settlers behave very badly towards Arabs and they're really nasty. And this is a problem and it should be handled somehow. But this, of course, does not justify this kind of violence. What I found interesting, by the way, is there was just yesterday, I think, there was a survey coming out of among Palestinians and from the West Bank and Gaza about the support of what happened on October 7th. Interestingly, there was some support, but the support was bigger in the West Bank than in Gaza. So that means what a lot of people say, okay, now Israel is trying to destroy Hamas, but there was so many new Hamas fighters then as a response to that. I don't believe that. It doesn't mean if you're attacked that you then become a so-called resistance fighter or terrorist. This is not true, but people pretend this, I think, sometimes.
Any other questions?
Rabbi, I'm wondering, is there a concern about foreign money coming into the universities, muting the criticism?
Yes, this is more and more reports. Thank you for raising this question. More and more reports come out on that, and there needs to be much more scrutiny. A lot of universities have received billions of dollars from Qatar mostly, but also from other Arab countries. And that might be a reason that, first of all, that there is that faculty is sponsored that is anti-Zionist, and studies are done in this. So this is establishing anti-Zionism in many fields, even. But then also that universities do not want to say something that might upset donors from abroad. Yes. Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right, and there needs to be much more scrutiny about this.
Any other questions?
Hello, can you hear me? Hello.
Oh, good.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
you're heard. You're not entirely seen, but you are heard.
Yeah, well, maybe that's best. Who knows? I was looking at one of the reports from an organization interested in the economies of the Arab countries and the amount of money they give to universities, particularly for research programs. And I came across this. Cornell University is one of the biggest recipients, but the fact is that over a certain number of years, they've received over $99 billion. Billion. It's 99 billion. For some reason, the number is 99,999,999. I have no idea why. So this Arab funding is pretty substantial, and you can see why the presidents of these universities, were pretty frightened about making waves. I mean, if the Jewish organizations, there's only one country that's a Jewish country. And of course, we have Jews in America, but I'm just one country is a Jewish country. How many Arab countries are there? And those are many incredible sources to make contributions to these universities, professorships, research, everything. And when you add up that money, it's absolutely, not only Qatar, which is insane, it's insane, but it's absolutely mind-boggling. Of course, money talking. Money talking heavily, strongly. And that question I have also is these youngsters who maybe get funding to be part of these protests and that sort of thing, are they primarily Arab from other countries? Or are they primarily Arab youngsters who are American citizens? I don't know. What the proportion happens to be. But if you're a nice Jewish boy, you don't go out and do things like that. But the kids from the other countries, I'm not sure if it's population overall or what, overwhelming population, but they seem to have no trouble just getting together and just protesting or doing whatever it is they're supposed to do to make Jews and Israel look bad. They just appear to be either more militant as a group, or more militant as individuals. What do you have from that? The Jewish kids. Generally speaking, you're a nice Jewish girl, you're a nice Jewish boy. Are you going to go out there and go screaming and yelling and honking at China and all that kind of stuff? No, So they've got the Arabs have that going for them, okay. And so, and then when they have so many countries they come from, and some countries give money to other countries to give to these universities. I saw something where the Palestinian Authority gave like $4 million to some universities in the United States. And someone would say, well, wait a second, they've been giving millions of dollars to these universities. what about their own people, right? So probably they gave them money so the kids could come to America and do what you're saying, go to especially anti-Zionist programs or whatever. But in any case, what do you feel about these? It's a great generalization for me to say nice Jewish boy, nice Jewish girl, whatever. But I think it's a tremendous kind of reality. Yeah, it's like there's no space that the Jewish kids fill because the other guys have the guts and even if they have money, I don't even know if you pay Jewish kids whether they would do that. So
Yeah.
go ahead.
Can I talk for a second? I do know something about the composition of these groups.
Great.
And it's not primarily Palestinian American kids or Palestinian kids. It's primarily homegrown American kids who are just white kids who are persuaded by their ignorance of history, the notion of standing up for an underdog. You know, there's no doubt that people in Gaza are suffering, but they don't look beyond the end of their noses. And they have been persuaded by a version of identity politics, which is that somehow, you know, you have to stand with, as the professor was saying, you know, the white people versus the brown people, and so they count Jews as white, which is interesting, but they also don't question the kind of, you know, intersectionality of what it means to be brown, or the class issues that are involved, or the historical issues. It's opaque. It's an identity politics of the most crude form, and the bulk of the protesters are white kids. They're not being paid by anybody. They're not, you know, some of the groups get some support, but it really isn't coming from that. It's coming from homegrown anti-Semitism and historical ignorance, in my view.
What about American kids and how they've been brought up? My mind doesn't work very well because of my age, but they're brought up in a permissive, generally permissive, unless they're really in horrifying circumstances, and they've been brought up to be open-minded to a certain degree. And when you have the right propaganda and solidly and intensively organized and developed, it's going to persuade a lot of people, including Jewish kids. But you know, if I was an Arab, I would say, you know, these guys, we were in this land. Yeah, they were there when the ancient times and so forth and so on. But we're on this land. They were on this land, and England did this, and so now we're forced to get off our land and move from our buildings and everything else. And you can see where that's a hot item to be able to take advantage of.
I need to break in here and give Günther a chance to respond. With all the good stuff you had to say, Larry or Lawrence, I'm not sure this is the time and place to review the whole Israel-Palestine situation. We can do that another time. I'm going to be offering a course in about a month. We can go over some of this again. But Günther, if you'd like to respond to what's been said, I'm sure you've got something to say.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think it's on every campus is a bit different, but a lot of these on the organization level, it's often led by mainly two organizations. The Palestine they have different names on different campuses. Palestine for Justice, Students for Justice in Palestine, or Palestine Solidarity Committee. These are organizations that are active on many campuses, and often they work hand in hand, at least on our campus, with Jewish Voice for Peace. And then the Jewish Voice for Peace is then misused, I would say, as I noted. But then, as you rightly said, there's a lot of non-Arab, non-Palestinian young people who I think have this what I see as a climate even that many people, young people mostly share, not only young people, saying America is maybe a great country, but is also responsible for a lot of bad in the world. And so this is America should not be so active in the wider world. It should not do so much harm in the world. Should retreat from everywhere, and should have less power. And there is a kind of like even this kind of feeling ashamed for being American. I see that. I wouldn't share that. I'm not American, but I wouldn't share that. I think America is still a great country with a lot of possibilities that allows people like me to come here and do things, and many people from different countries. But still, there is this idea, and then yes, they criticize their own country, but what is a better country to criticize than Israel? You know, so if you don't want to do it, if you want to project all of that to another country, what other countries would fit better? You know, if you have all these ideas, a lot of projections, and this is how anti-Semitism works usually. You don't address problems, you project the problems. It's really, anti-Semites are cowards. They don't address problems. They just put problems onto others and say, well, the world is governed by this and this, and these are the evil, this is evil, the Jews are guilty, Israel is guilty. And they don't address the actual problems of racism or of other things. Right? So this is, I think, a mechanism that I see, which is deeply troubling, this kind of mindset. But this is a mindset, and if we can call it identity politics, it has all these different sources. And there's also a lot of confusion. Many people are not really, don't have a coherent worldview, really. It's just some, they're not good in any theory, they're not good in history, and they don't want to be. This is, yeah, that's one thing. And one other thing I want to add, because Lawrence, you said that with the influence of other countries. We live in a world where influence and even we can even call it a low level of war is going on in many levels. You don't have to actually put troops on the ground, but countries try to influence other countries in many ways, and including in propaganda. This is also nothing new. In the 1959 and 1960, there was a wave of anti-Semitic graffiti throughout Europe, starting in Germany. It turned out, I mean, that was partly from the German population, but it was also in part because it was by Soviet sponsored, by a few of them at least, right? And even back then, but now we have, of course, we see that on social media. Russia has an influence on social media. What does Russia want to see? They want to see like Americans fighting each other. And I was invited by Sputnik Radio and all this, this is Russian propaganda outlets. And what they wanted me to say, I didn't do, but they wanted me to say how bad anti-Semitism in Europe is, so that they can say, look, Russia is great, there's chaos in Europe. And the same they want to do for America. And that Qatar tries to have influence with a lot of, I mean, they do this with Al Jazeera. That's a very success story for them, how they punch very much above their weight. Qatar is a tiny country with tons of money, but still it's a tiny country. But with this propaganda outlets, Al Jazeera, and also funding, they can have some influence. So it's not surprising in principle that this is happening.
Joan and then Wendy.
Hi, this is Joan Schneider speaking. I have a three-part question. Yes, I totally agree that youngsters these days have a decided lack of any historical sense. And I mean, they just don't understand the past. And I think you're correct. They don't want to know about the past. They don't think the past is relevant. That's one part. The second part is, Professor, do you know, is there any governing body that screens or filters funds coming to universities in the United States? And it seems to me this is a very similar situation as went on with China not very many years ago in funding a lot of scientific research and sending their people here. And there was a backlash from that. And it seems to me this would be the area where something could be done, because our universities have become corporate. They're no longer what's major thing that universities are interested in is money. It's not education anymore, in my opinion. And I think in the opinion of others too. And bringing the money in comes first. And where that money comes from doesn't seem to be too important. And the third thing I'd like to say is that, you know, young people, it's very trendy to protest. And I think this new generation are sort of jealous of what went on in the 60s in our country. And I think they're almost willing to jump on any bandwagon to get into this social protest sort of milieu. So that's what I'd like to hear your response to those things. Thank you.
Joan, thank you so much. Yes, I think you're absolutely right with the funding, and there should be, as I said, much more scrutiny on it. This is only starting, that organizations are looking into that. A lot of this money was also apparently not. The universities tried to hide it where the money was coming from. So there is something that you could say that's illegal. So that people are trying now to push this a bit more. So I think that is the right way to go, to just put to the open, and at least that's transparent then where the money is coming from. And so that's one thing. It's interesting that you're saying that there is this kind of an envy for the 1960s. I'm not sure, but I also noticed that resistance has an appeal, whatever resistance that is. Resistance. I see that even on stickers. Resist. Even in my road, here, I have some stickers here. Resist. I'm clear to what resist. Resist to what, actually? Nobody knows, but resist. And then in this mindset, this fits then the resistance fighters, right? Resist for what? It's for what are they? I mean, Hamas is for what are they fighting for what rights are they fighting? They're fighting for the rights to slaughter Jews. That's what they want. I mean, this is the resistance. So there's no reflection of what then resistance really is. But yeah, you're right. I think there is this appeal, resistance to whatever.
Yeah, Wendy? Where'd you go?
Oh, I'm right here. Yeah, I wanted to mention something I saw the other day. I was driving home from work and I saw a car flying a Palestinian flag, and the driver was wearing this really horrible white mask. It was absolutely terrifying, but I was absolutely no idea what I was looking at. So I was wondering if you knew what that was all about.
The white mask with the could you describe it a bit more?
It covered their whole face, and it had an angry look on the mask.
I know a smiling face.
No.
Black and white, no. Yeah, I honestly I don't know, but I like the periodic table that you have in the background Sorry.
I'm a chemistry professor, so I always
I
have
love
the
that. Yes. Yeah, sorry, I don't know what this angry face is. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe it's unique to Riverside. Christine?
Yeah, I just wanted to put in a little word for the current generation of students. It's very split in this country, as you might imagine, because there are extremely progressive, good-hearted, hardworking, well-organized young
This
people
guy
who
looks
are
like Dan.
much clearer
Fellow
than,
looks like Dan.
than their compatriots. And just like there were nice Jewish boys and girls who were in the anti-war movement in the 60s, there are people who are activists who are not ignorant and who want to know more. Some of the environmental activists, some of the anti-racist activists. So I don't think it's of a piece. I don't think it's the whole generation. I think it's very fragmented. But there are these grassroots organizations which really are logical allies. And that's what I don't want people to make little of.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I have just this is the finals week, and I had 130 students in my class on white supremacism and anti-Semitism on social media.
Right.
Many really of these 130 students are really very bright, and they reflect on things. And absolutely, it's not across the board.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. And of course, I mean, this is also something when we say, that the young people don't appreciate history. When I was 20, I didn't appreciate history. I thought, well, everything can be made new without the history. This is something, I think this is a kind of natural thing for young people, because they don't have the history, their own history so much.
And we've all done so well.
So yeah, I think that, but you're right, it's not across the board, but I think that many of them are intimidated by this very vocal people who protest and voice support for Hamas. I think they're intimidated by this, even if they don't agree with that. And then they don't even many professors are also intimidated by this, and they don't address issues. So fewer and fewer professors have an approach that they provide different views to students. For example, we discussed critical race theory, and we said there are 4 main different views on that. Some are supportive, some are not, and here are different views. So you think what you want to think anyway. I'm not here to change I cannot change your opinions anyway. You have your opinions, but here is the information, right? And we can discuss it. But this is many professors don't dare even to say that, because they feel, I don't know, they were going to be attacked or something. Students as well, some of them, they don't want to speak out, and
So I'd like to call your attention to something that just came across my feed, and I put it in the chat. There's a podcast I listen to called the Tikva Podcast, Tikvah, the Tikva Podcast, and their most recent edition just sent out like now is 3 speakers. I don't know the names of it. I don't recognize the names of these people. Alexandra Orbuch, Gabriel Diamond, and Zach Kessel on the situation for Jews on American campuses. So that's really relevant to what we're talking about now. I imagine it's going to turn out to be more complex than we think, but that the news probably isn't as good as we would like it to be. So Günther, in spite of the technological issue we had an hour ago, you made it here. You gave a really interesting talk. I really want to thank you very much for joining us all the way from Bloomington, Indiana, which is some 2,000 miles from here and 3 hours difference. So it's probably getting on toward your bedtime. Again, once again, thank you very much. I'm really glad I got to know you. So
thank you for the invitation, and thank you all for for this really good conversation that we had. Thank you.
Thank you,
Wonderful.
Professor.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you,
Okay.
Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi and
Thank you,
Professor.
Professor.
Good night, everybody.
That was interesting.